Good to go, Dylan? Or are we waiting on people?
I guess I thought maybe Marjorie was going to come, but I guess not, and that's okay too. Yeah, we can get started then. Yeah, today we're looking at philosophy, history, and a bunch of other things in our other disciplines catalog. Yeah, we're going to start with philosophy with a recap of basic problems of philosophy. On to you, Stephen.
Yeah, and I'll be presenting the majority of the philosophy books this term, but likely for the last time after 15 years of doing this, as this is mostly carryover from Archie having been working as a freelancer. And going forward, he'll likely be doing more of these philosophy books than I, though I'll still be doing some. Um, Also, I wanted to mention that I wanted to try something new with this specific meeting and maybe something we'll experiment with in future meetings as well. Please do feel welcome to use the raise hand button on the reactions if you want to ask a question or interject with something or have an idea. Um, we haven't been in regular practice of doing that at Broadview, but I think we've all been to external meetings where that is the norm. And some folks at Broadview have specifically mentioned that they would prefer that that be part of the norm, and I think rightly so, because we do end up talking past each other, talking over each other, not infrequently, and it can be tough to get an interjection in. So you don't have to. If it's dead silence, feel welcome to just say something. But if you want to, feel welcome to use the raise hand button, and I will moderate for the books I'm presenting on. Where if someone has their hand raised and then someone else starts speaking, I'm going to say, "Hold on a second. Let's turn to that person first." Sound good? All right. So starting with, oh, did Christine have
Christine
her
had a
hand
hand
I was
raised, or are
going to
you just
just
raised.
being
try it
cheeky?
out quickly. One thing I'll say, just as a reminder to reps, because this came up in a conversation from Peterborough, we have an other disciplines catalog this year. So as you're requesting things for your offices and for your trips, I know some folks have things in August and in early September. Please make sure to include the other disciplines catalog when you're making those requests.
Yes, good point. And if you haven't read it, once you get office copies, give it a read through. There's a lot of interesting books in there that point to some new directions that Broadview is going in that may be unfamiliar. And if you feel uncomfortable with any of those areas, might be worth reading a bit more or asking the responsible editors. So, basic problems of philosophy. I am not going to spend very much time on this one at all, just to recap. And that's for two reasons. One being that I already presented on this book at the January sales conference. It unfortunately was delayed several months, hence its representation now. Apologies for that. I always try to not jump the gun with these book presentations, but I clearly did there. We are on track now. We have the page proofs being proofread. And available if someone really wanted to see an advanced copy. We have one blurb in, hoping for another, and should be going to press in September at some point. So undeniably on track now, but apologies for those delays. The second reason why I'm not going to say much about it is that it is worth noting that though this is an introductory philosophy book, so a big market, we class it here as a C book. And as you can see, our expectations for sales and revenue are modest for this one. And it's important to recognize that in our sales conversations. Um, if you're meeting someone who's not taught introductory, who you've not talked with about their introductory philosophy course before, you want to pitch BIP first or experiencing philosophy first. You want to pitch one of those books that has a proven track record and that we know has worked very well in many people's classrooms. This is going to be more of a niche book. For someone that you speak with all the time, sure, feel welcome to bring it up. But I definitely don't recommend that if you're meeting someone new, this be the first book that comes to your mind, unless the conversation gets clearly steered in that direction. On that note, there is a bit of a contradiction, I would say, in some of the feedback we receive when we speak with first year philosophy instructors, both as reps and as editors, and what we see in the sales patterns. We hear repeatedly people saying, I can't have my students read these 18th century, 17th century primary source texts. They're too difficult, they're too long. They need short readings, very, very short excerpts. They need brief textbook pieces instead of those primary sources. And I think there is undeniably some truth to that. But the fact of the matter is that BIP, which is a fairly sophisticated anthology with long readings, remains far and away our most popular introductory philosophy textbook. And many other leaders in this market are as well anthologies in that conventional style. Whether they're working or not in the classroom, it's harder for us to say as a publisher, but they are what's being adopted more often than these shorter texts. Nonetheless, maybe there is a longer term trend here toward authored textbooks that offer a singular voice, as this one does, and that try to simplify some of those conversations and ideas in ways that the primary source texts don't. So what does this book do? It is, as I say, a singular voice presenting an overview of all of the main conventional fields of Western philosophy as it's taught in typical universities and colleges. So it covers logic, metaphysics, religion, epistemology, ethics, politics, and aesthetics. That last one, aesthetics, is not covered in every introductory program, but some do like it, and it's fully optional at the end of this book for people who do or don't want it. It's a problem-focused approach, so it is engaging with the concepts and issues of these different fields of philosophy, not so much the history. There are discussions of that history, but those discussions are used only to clarify the problems at play. It is not about teaching that history. What's distinct about this book in comparison to other introductory philosophy survey textbooks from single authors? One is that it strikes a bit of a middle ground, and I think a good middle ground in terms of its length and sophistication. If you look to the books I've listed as competitors from other publishers, some of these, and some of them that do sell well in classrooms, such as Nagel's What Does It All Mean and Solomon's The Little Philosophy Book, both of those by well-known celebrity philosophers. Those are very, very short books. They're inexpensive, yes, but they're only a little over 100 pages. So that's not enough on its own to be the sole material for an introductory philosophy course. And it's only enough space to glide fairly superficially over the various topics that are being discussed. On the other hand, you have much larger and much more expensive books. Something like Experiencing Philosophy is perhaps the model for that, a mostly authored textbook with a lot of pedagogical features and a lot of breadth of coverage. But that's a very different proposition too. That is quite demanding of students, even if the presentation of material is fairly rudimentary. It's still a lot of reading to go through. There's still a lot of stuff there. This strikes a middle ground, both in its price, quite affordable. It would even fit in its ebook version to many low-cost programs, and in the depth of its coverage. It's entirely manageable within a single semester course. And that's especially the case because its chapters are quite modular. If an instructor doesn't cover aesthetics, they can easily chop that off. If a course doesn't get into ethics and politics, as some intro philosophy courses don't, those can be chopped off. There's too much metaphysics, chop off one of those chapters without harming the overall presentation of the material. Another distinctive feature, which I touched on under the January conference, is that each chapter opens with a really engaging historical vignette that tries to motivate even the rather abstract philosophical issues at play. Most of those are actual historical stories, things that happened. Yeah, so that's my condensed presentation of this book. Those who were around for the January conference may remember other details, but those are the main things that I would want people to be aware of. Any questions or comments on this one? Brett.
Sorry to not do that digitally or virtually. Can you remind me really quickly? I remember you talking about this, Stephen, but like the length and the nature of those vignettes at the beginning of each chapter, are they just like a paragraph or two, or are they more substantial, and do they really lead in and link to the content of the chapter?
A little more substantial than that. I would say they average about a page. So a few paragraphs a piece. And they do flow nicely into the chapter. Usually there is a presentation of the story itself, and then a transition into what does this tell us? What questions does this raise? So not referenced throughout the chapter, but it's not just dropped there and left for abstract interpretation. It is engaged in the introductions of each of the chapters. Guelph Hand? Don't know who it is.
Yeah, sorry. So I was just wondering, do you remind me, does the book actually contain any excerpts of primary sources at all, or is it more of just a summary?
Excerpts in the sense of like 2-sentence passages. Yes, it does contain those, but nothing that could be called readings. Certainly not BIP style readings, but not experiencing philosophy style readings where it's sometimes a couple pages either. It is an authored textbook with no permissions, if that clarifies. Everything that is excerpted is within the domains of fair dealing.
Thank you.
Anything else? All right, moving on then to an A-list book. The only such book that I have this term, which is the second edition of Dan DiNicola's Moral Philosophy, A Contemporary Introduction. A book that I'm very proud of. I think is one of the strongest in our philosophy list. It's inspired by Brett's excellent PowerPoint use yesterday. So I very hastily this morning constructed a PowerPoint to touch on some aspects of this, which I'm going to share now. I did this in the last hour, so pardon me if it's not great. But thanks to Brett for the inspiration. Is that on screen?
Yep.
Okay, I'll maximize, which means I probably can't see it for a few minutes. Just yell out if I need to be addressed. Yeah, so moral philosophy, it is an introductory ethics text covering the moral theories in the way that many other introductory ethics texts do, including some that are very well known, such as the Rachel's and Rachel's Elements of Moral Philosophy. So what distinguishes moral philosophy, the Dan DiNicola, from other ethics texts? I think it's very clear, for one thing. The writing is outstanding, and that's hard to express as an abstract point. It's something that really an instructor would have to see for themselves. I think it has really good pacing, pacing that's perfectly appropriate for a first or second year course. It gives enough depth, but doesn't dwell on points to a degree that students would get bored or think that things are being repeated. They're repeated only in cases where that's necessary for clarification. Dan DiNicola is a very thoughtful pedagogue, and I think that comes across clearly in his thinking about the pacing of this book and how much things should be emphasized relative to one another. The price is a more self-evident point, especially for Canadians. We are quite a bit less expensive than some of the market leaders. Now, as I note in the NBI, when this book came out in its first edition, unfortunately for us, Norton also decided to enter the introductory ethics market with Jonathan Wolfe's book, which was right at the same price and had a lot of similar traits, and it still does. We're a few bucks cheaper than the latest edition of Wolfe's book from Norton, but not vastly cheaper. We are still quite a bit less expensive than most of the others in this market. Effective chapter opening case studies. We talked just briefly now about the opening vignettes in Basic Problems. This one has excellent chapter openers as well that really invite students to think carefully on how their own lives intersect with the topics at play. I've excerpted an example of one of those. This is from the new chapter, From Nietzsche to the Ethics of Identity.
Stephen?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but the slides are not moving on for me. Like I'm still on the front cover, and I don't know whether that is intentional or not.
Yeah, that's true for me as well. Now it's changed.
Okay. There we go.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. All right, faulty presentation then. But let me go back and just use the non-presentation format. There must be a way of doing that on a Zoom.
I was going to say, it never even came up as a presentation format for us. It still is like the PowerPoint window.
If you click slideshow at the top menu and then press begin, there.
Is that just going to do the same thing though? Is it changing slides?
It shouldn't. Then you click and go. That's the way I
is it changing slides?
Anyway. It doesn't look like it is doing it.
Yeah. No, that's the same thing I did the first time, just with a different button.
All right.
So, no worries. I'll just leave it on this view. But thanks for calling that out. So here is the chapter opening story or case study for the new chapter on Nietzsche and the Ethics of Identity. And this one gets into issues of cultural appropriation in, I think, a nuanced way. Issues that are familiar to students that they probably have thought about and talked about, and that motivate some of the discussions within this chapter. Every single chapter of the book opens with something like this that's quite engaging, fun to read, and concise. Another important but slightly more abstract feature that this book exhibits in comparison to many of its rivals is that it guides students away from cynicism about ethical theory. I realize that's a rather abstract point, so I want to belabor it with a digression. So if you'll indulge me for a few moments, what's a common experience in an introductory ethics course? I think this is how an introductory ethics course often plays out. The instructor begins, and the readings begin, by talking about moral relativism, the idea that what's right within a given culture is determined by that culture and not by any external or objective moral rules. So we, as in our case, mostly urban Canadians, have our own societal beliefs about what's right and what's wrong. And we know that in some areas, these beliefs are at odds with, say, the moral beliefs of Inuit people, perhaps traditionally, or people in Iran or Vietnam, or historical people from our own culture. All of these societies deserve respect and are legitimate. And so it seems that there's good grounds for thinking that ethical claims simply are relative. There is no truth to the matter. So that's presented, the positive case is made in the classroom and through the readings. But then it's noted that, what about all of the many problems with certain cultural practices? So, for example, slavery and torture and mutilation. All of these things we probably want to say are wrong, regardless of the culture in which they are practiced and regardless of whether they are understood to be acceptable in that culture. We would want to say that the people of our culture or North American culture, insofar as they practiced slavery hundreds of years ago, were wrong about that. It wasn't just a matter of their perspective. There is some sort of objective truth on some of these matters, so relativism is false. And then another theory is presented. This is the next week's readings and discussions. Say it's utilitarianism, as it is in many cases. And this just holds that the right thing to do is whatever leads to the greatest good for the greatest number of people. This seems right. More good is better than less good. We can all agree about that. It's easy to find examples of how utilitarianism can guide us in the right directions. But then some thought experiments are presented in the readings and in the classroom. And you're asked to think about something like this. An honest but malevolent kidnapper has taken you and your spouse hostage at gunpoint, and they put a knife in your hand, and they said, "Kill your spouse, or I'm going to kill you both." And you know that they're telling the truth. Now, surely this wouldn't make it right to kill your spouse, we might say, despite the fact that we believe that if you kill your spouse, only one person's going to die. In the other situation, two people are going to die. So the moral calculus from utilitarianism seems to say that it is right to kill your spouse. But we have this counterexample, therefore, utilitarianism is false. So we've got nowhere. And then in the next week of lectures and readings, we get deontology, Kantian ethics. And this seems right too. Severe wrongs are always wrong. Enslavement, rape, torture, these kinds of things. It's correct to say that it is never right to engage in such conduct. But then again, counterexamples are presented. So maybe something like this. You see a frightened child being chased down the street by armed goons, and the child hides in a nearby garbage bin. And the goons ask, "You, where did they go?" Surely it's okay to lie in that situation, and probably even morally commendable to lie in that situation. And therefore, deontology is false. And so on and so on. And so the course goes through a bunch of moral theories and shows why they're wrong. And what's the effect of this? For the student, well, for many of these students, I think everyone who's been part of an ethics class, let alone taught an ethics class, has found that the students often respond quite negatively. They find that, so after thousands of centuries, as you're saying, this goes back to Plato, if not longer, philosophers still don't have any consensus on even the starting principles of ethics. And every theory that these supposedly brilliant minds have come up with is wrong. What that means is ethics is bullshit and deserving of neither study nor real world consideration. And so the student leaves their one mandatory philosophy class disgruntled and with no interest or respect for philosophy whatsoever. That's not an uncommon experience. And it's a legitimately difficult one to get around because the truth of the matter is that, yes, philosophers are still discussing what's right and what's wrong at a very basic level. It's not just about the fine details. There are legitimate professionals defending deontology, professionals defending utilitarianism, who are at odds with one another on starting principles. So how can you address that in an introductory course or in an introductory ethics text? Well, I think De Nicola does that about as well as anyone can, and I think probably better than the way it's approached by other writers of introductory ethics texts. Again, he's guiding students away from that cynicism. So one way he does this is an outstanding opening chapter on methodology, and methodology at a very basic level, methodology written for first or second year students. Among other things, he presents these tests for an ethical theory, tests of the logic and the plausibility. Is the theory clear and coherent? Can it guide our practice? Does the theory rest on a plausible account of human nature and psychology? Does it give a plausible account of common moral phenomena? And does it provide guidance and does it harmonize with the other spheres of our life? And he gets into further details on how you would ask these questions and apply them to the theories in comparison with one another. So he really tries hard to offer students tools to think about the value of these theories and not just think, well, there's a counterexample, so this theory is defeated and it has no value to offer us. Or to think that it's an entirely arbitrary choice between these various theories. He's saying not that this theory is the right one, but that we can compare them against one another and that there are good grounds for doing so. In addition to this, he offers a lot of apparatus throughout the book, including at the end of each chapter through very thoughtful questions for discussion and reflection. These questions are better than the questions in most textbooks. They really are designed to get the student thinking carefully about the application of the theory to their life, whether the theory holds value, whether it coheres with their other moral commitments and beliefs, and to compare that theory against the others that have been presented within the book. So that's all I have to offer by way of slideshow. I wanted to give those concrete examples of how some of these key features of Dean Acola's book are provided and how it stands out from others. Turning back to, I want to say a few more words about a few things. Christina, do you want to interject now, or?
Sorry, no, I just have a question and I don't want to forget that I have a question. So
no problem. Yeah, definitely give some time for that. A lot of these aspects of the book are ones that will require the instructor to have a look to see whether it does indeed do these things better than other books. We can give our word, but that doesn't carry much as a sales rep for the company selling that book. But hopefully they are at least compelling points that will lead someone to want to have a look. Other distinctive aspects that you can point to, especially with this new edition, are those features that I've highlighted in the NBI. I think that this new chapter, chapter 13, that examines postmodernist thought, is really quite sophisticated and will be valued. And I don't think it would be a bad idea if you're having a conversation to name drop some of the philosophers who've been added to that conversation. So Nietzsche, for one, Kimberly Crenshaw, a legal theorist who's not often discussed in ethical theory textbooks, but as many of you know, is increasingly prominent in the past decade or so as one of the creators of critical race theory. Carol Pateman, Charles Mills, these are people that I think may intrigue potential instructors who would use this book because they are known, but maybe just on that borderline of familiarity in an introductory ethics class, and compelling insofar as they aren't discussed in most other texts. So I would keep those in mind. Effective altruism is an interesting emergent movement that's had quite a bit of cultural cachet over the past 5 to 10 years, and a discussion of that is added to the utilitarianism chapter, worth mentioning as well, perhaps. What's the market for this book? It has two separate markets, ethics markets, indeed. One of them is Introduction to Ethics. And when you're trying to figure out whether this is a good fit for such a course, part of what you may need to determine is whether the course focuses or covers applied ethical issues, or whether it focuses solely on ethical theory. This book focuses solely on ethical theory. It does not engage with applied ethical issues. Some other competing books do. And for those kinds of courses, those other books are going to be a better fit. It's very well written. It's very clear, but it is several hundred pages and is written with intelligence, sophistication for a really rudimentary ethics course for first-year students at a college where instructors are strongly worried about their students' ability to understand course materials. This might be a bit too advanced. But for a good four-year university, I think it would be perfectly fine for a first-year class. It can also be used in ethical theory classes specifically. A second or third year ethical theory class. This covers pretty much all the ground that an instructor would normally want to cover in that type of course. In that context, the ethical theory course, but probably less so the introduction to ethics class, it's worth mentioning as well the companion anthology, A Reader in Moral Philosophy, which we published a few years ago. That anthology is also by Di Nicola, and he compiled it as a collection of readings meant to map onto the first edition of Moral Philosophy very tightly. The chapters exactly align with one another. Now, with this new edition of Moral Philosophy, there is a slight misalignment. Specifically, the chapter numbering doesn't quite match, and the new chapter throws things off very slightly. But it's not a big deal. It's still very easy to see how the content of the anthology could be paired with this new edition, with little disagreement between the two books. The reader also includes readings on ethical issues. So a more advanced ethical survey that's talking about theory and issues could also make good use of this book. The only reason I don't mention the pairing of these books for an introductory ethics course, though it's possible, absolutely possible, is just that that's a lot of material. Then you're talking over 1,000 pages of total material, which I think in most introductory ethics courses is going to be a little too much. I mentioned the competition. Again, there are many good and well-established books in this area. Everyone who teaches these kinds of courses will be familiar with the Rachels and Rachels and the Schaefer-Landau text, both of which are very good, both of which are very expensive from McGraw-Hill and OUP, and both of which I think come across as a little old-fashioned at this point and haven't been maybe as thoroughly updated as one might expect for a contemporary ethics text. Jonathan Wolf's book from Norton, on the other hand, is also very familiar to people, heavily marketed, now the market leader, and it is fairly up to speed as well. It has its advantages and disadvantages against Di Nicola's text. Okay, I went on for a while, only because it's an A-list book. Christine, I think you were doing it first.
It's sort of a broader question. I was just noting that the Norton is already into its third edition as of last year. So that's a new edition every, what, 2.6, 2.5 years? Are you finding that across the board with Norton's big market-leading text, that they are very quickly being pushed to new updates, or is this one sort of an outlier?
Well, Norton's a funny case because they weren't really doing philosophy textbook publishing until about 10 years ago, except for some small niches. And then they got into it wholeheartedly. I think my impression is that Norton's enthusiasm for philosophy publishing may have slightly diminished in more recent years because they have not kept that up. They published a very big 19th century philosophy anthology that I think probably was a financial disaster for them. And they haven't, I think they've only, to my recollection, issued 2 versions of the Norton Introduction to Philosophy, their anthology that competes with them. So it's mostly just these 2 markets that they're really gunning for in philosophy. So yeah, they have been enthusiastic and I think quite successful with Wolf's ethics texts, which include A Reader as well. But it's hard to generalize because there's only those 2 cases.
Fair enough. Yeah, I was wondering if that was something of an advantage, that we're not also pushing editions every couple of years. If people get their notes into one, they can rely on it for a while. One other comment I'll say, especially for the more recent reps on the line, it is very worth the time to read one chapter from the Di Nicola and one chapter from Kernahan's ethics overview. I think that'll give you a really strong sense of the different tones, levels, markets for them, and where you might pitch one versus the other.
Excellent point, Christine. Yeah, for those intro classes, those intro ethics classes where the instructor finds that this is too sophisticated, I would mention the Kernahan book, and I would mention the Applied Ethics Primer as well as good alternatives. Brett?
Yeah, just a really quick one. We have not ever, like, it's 1,000 pages to do both books together. We've never had an adoption of the bundle that we have for these two, right? Like, it's usually just like you're doing readings, you're doing the, or you want the readings, you want the overview.
I genuinely don't know. I should look that up. The reader has not sold as well as we'd hoped, but it sold okay. We've had a couple hundred each year. I'm not sure about the package though. It's one of those cases where again we struggle to effectively sell packages for whatever reason, even when we think our pricing matches, because we know that there are adoptions of the historically the Rachels and Rachels anthology and authored textbook, and of the Schaefer Landau anthology and authored textbook. But that pairing hasn't really worked for us so far. Dave?
I was really interested to hear what you were saying about that the cynicism in these intro to ethics classes. I had no idea, and that's really fascinating. Is Dean Acola's approach different from Wolf's in that regard, or is Wolf doing something similar?
It's a good question, Dave, and I don't think I can give you an adequate answer because it's been a while since I've read The Wolf and I've not seen the third edition. Yeah, I can't compare against The Wolf on that point. It is, I think, better than, in my opinion, than the way it's handled in the Rachels and Rachels, which I think is a little too opinionated and open-ended, and the Schaefer Landau. I think this one is more systematic. It really emphasizes, always ask these questions when you're thinking about these theories in comparison to one another, and doesn't invite that cynicism. Good question about The Wolf. Sorry, I can't answer more clearly.
It's okay.
Emma?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, would you say the terms ethics and moral philosophy are perfectly synonymous? Or is moral philosophy, does that signal like a focus on theory or something?
Good question. In academic philosophy as a convention, they are effectively synonymous for the vast majority of instructors. I think that's kind of a disciplinary quirk because we know that in sociology and other areas, morals and ethics are sometimes considered different things. But when you see a course called moral philosophy or a course called ethics, barring further information, it's fair to assume that they're covering similar ground.
Okay.
All right, moving on then. Canadian Cases in the Philosophy of Law, 6th edition. The authors were asking me, how long has this book been around? And indeed, it is among Broadview's oldest. Its first edition was, I think, 1989. So with that first batch of books alongside, I think, folk and fairy tales and critical thinking, only a handful of our titles are still published and available in new editions from that era. And this is one of them, though Jerome Bickenbach from Queens, who was the original editor of this book, stepped back a number of years ago for the last edition as he entered retirement in a different career. And it remains, or at least it is at this point, the only book of its type for a Canadian audience. In the spring, I spoke about the latest edition, the 4th edition of Readings in the Philosophy of Law, which is one of our most well-regarded and highest revenue philosophy textbooks, also been around for a while. That is also, I think at this point, the market leader in philosophy of law. That book, the anthology, should, in my opinion, still and always be the go-to book in conversations with philosophy of law instructors, at least if they've not already seen it. I would always begin by talking about that excellent anthology by the same editors as this book. But that anthology is a collection of mostly academic articles, it is quite advanced and highly abstract. You're talking about different understandings of the nature of law and its interpretation. There's not a lot of engagement, except in specific nuance amongst the individual authors of the articles in that book. There's not a lot of engagement with specific real world case law. And so, for that reason, Canadian Cases works quite brilliantly as a supplement to a book like Readings in the Philosophy of Law, or as a supplement to an instructor's own selection of curated academic articles that they might use to teach this subject matter. The objection we often face when we raise the idea of this book or of the new American Cases in the Philosophy of Law is, why should I get my students to pay for legal cases where Supreme Court cases in both the US and Canada are effectively, it doesn't quite work that way, but they are effectively public domain, and they can be read and used for free. And we are using them for free in these anthologies, but anyone can just provide a link in their learning management system to the relevant cases. Well, there is a lot of work that's been put into this selection. The choosing of the cases involved surveying a huge number of additional cases that could have been considered for this collection. That's a large task. The organization of those cases into a structure that is pedagogically effective, that's a lot of work in itself. Now, someone could look to our website and see that structure and see that list of cases, simply duplicate it and provide the URLs for all of those Supreme Court cases to their students if they wanted to. Someone unscrupulous, at least. But there's also more work that's been put into this. There's the editing and excerpting of the cases. Most of them, not quite all of them, but most of them have been significantly cut down, and cut down thoughtfully in ways that highlight the salient philosophical features of these cases. Each case includes a brief headnote of roughly one paragraph that sets the stage for it, offers some background information, and explains why that case is relevant to the broader philosophical interpretive issue at play. Plus, there are the introductions to each of the book's topics, a general introduction to the book, a glossary, and again, a public domain thing. But as you can see from the table of contents, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms is appended at the back of the book. So that's all a lot of stuff that saves work for the instructor, who would otherwise need to do quite a bit of research, quite a bit of reading, excerpting, selection in order to compile just the cases themselves. And there's a lot of benefit to the student too, because the setting of the stage in the form of those introductions and headnotes will make it a lot easier for them to interpret these cases and their relevance. So what's new in this edition of this book? A number of things. They're a little bit tough to describe, unfortunately. So I think for most people, the pitch is going to be those key points about this book. But if someone's already familiar with it, they're going to be saying, well, it's been thoroughly updated. 13 new cases have been added, and they've been added throughout. Some cases have been cut, some have been added, a few have been moved to different sections. There's been a slight reorganization. In the NBI, I left the track changes intact on the table of contents so you could see exactly what's been shifted around. Assuming that wasn't in the circulated version, I can resend that if not.
I can recirculate that. I did accept all the track changes, but I can recirculate that. Sorry, Stephen.
Okay, apologies, Dylan. I should have clarified that I meant for that to be retained. In any case, we'll circulate that so you can see what's been adjusted. It's about the same size. It's slightly longer than the previous edition. I think, if I'm remembering right, it might be 2 more cases than the previous edition held. But 13 of the cases on whole are new. There is a new section toward the end of the book on extraterritorial applications of Canadian law and other related emerging issues. I added to the feature list the inclusion of a a bit of guidance that's been created for the ethical use of AI by judges, because that's a captivating point. I would say that it may be worth mentioning that, but don't highlight this as a key selling point of the new edition. We're talking a page or two of added material on that particular topic. It's just a catchy one to make note of. The extraterritorial application is probably a bigger change, a bigger addition to this new version. We've talked about this as recently as the spring sales conference. But again, what is philosophy of law? What are the courses we're looking for? It is two distinct sets of courses. The primary market is philosophy departments that have a designated course, typically third or fourth year level, titled Philosophy of Law. Sometimes there are law students in those courses, but usually not. Usually they're for undergraduates who are not yet in a law program, typically philosophy students or economic students or whatever adjacent disciplines who are planning to write the LSAT and are looking to get a bit of a foundation in legal reasoning before they make their career choices. Occasionally people just take it out of interest, but a lot of it is that kind of prep work prior to entering a law degree. And philosophy of law is its own legitimate discipline within philosophy. In legal studies, in faculties of law, there is most often a course called jurisprudence or something like it. And jurisprudence is the more common terminology than philosophy of law in those programs, but it's mostly the same territory. Mostly a jurisprudence course is covering the same kinds of topics as a philosophy of law course, maybe with slightly more sophistication. But either this book or the anthology would be appropriate for either of those contexts. Yeah, and then just the obvious point, barely we're saying, but this is a book for Canadian audiences only. It is sellable anywhere. There are no rights restrictions, but it's highly unlikely that any American course would make use of a book like this. If someone is interested in a case book, we have that new American Cases in the Philosophy of Law, which does a similar thing, if a little bit differently. Brett?
Yeah, very quick question again here. Would you recommend that we look, like when we're looking in class schedules, that we look in the law section, or would these it would most likely be cross-listed, would it not, like with philosophy?
They're not always cross-listed.
Okay.
I think it'd be worth taking a look. Not just a quick look. The primary market for us, because it's the instructors we reach better, and because these authors are primarily philosophers, is in those undergraduate philosophy of law courses. But if you're looking at course schedules, yeah, I do recommend pulling up the law faculty, taking a quick peek for a jurisprudence course and instructor, and sending them an email.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, just a practical question, Stephen. In terms of timing, I have a professor at UVic who's using this book this fall. And I think it's, of course, the previous edition that she's adopted. But yes, do we know when the book itself will be like physically in print, like in September?
Very soon, might even be the end of August. Good question. Let me just pull up the latest production report. See if we have a date there. September 11th is the estimation.
Okay. Okay. I'll maybe be in touch with her and ask her preference.
Yeah. Yeah, it's worth letting her know. We won't have a proper ebook for another month or so after that, too. Her choice.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Tarini, I would also maybe first check with Lisa to see if UVic has ordered the existing edition already, because if it's already stocked, then it'll be more of a headache, even if the professor wants to make a change.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good.
Any other questions? Okay. Moving on to other disciplines. And starting with my last book, which is not a proper book, or is it even another academic discipline? Academic Publishing, an Insider's Video Guide. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this because, again, this too is we're listing it as a C-list publication, and in polling a few folks on our editorial and sales team, there's a wide array of expectations on how this might perform, from we'll sell 0 copies to sell hundreds annually. I will say that when we surveyed a few folks a couple of years ago, asking them whether they would be interested in a set of resources on publishing written by or created by Broadview Press, several folks did say that they would indeed appreciate that, especially if it were not created as a textbook, not written by an external author, but a pretty gritty presentation from an insider's perspective of this kind of material. So, as you know, a few years ago, we reached an agreement with Trent University that obligated Broadview to provide their faculty and students with pedagogical resources that had been developed in-house at Broadview for staff training, alongside other materials that could be integrated into Trent curriculum. What we had at the time were some pretty rough videos. Basically, we'd had Zoom conversations with new staff members or staff members entering into new areas of the company, and simply hit the record button and saved those video files to my OneDrive and shared those in-house. And so when we first started negotiations with Trent, we described the existence of these materials. But we realized with the agreement that in order to make them appropriate for a broader audience, we would need to redo them, to polish them up a little bit, and probably expand their breadth of coverage to touch on more topics than what had been created to that point. So a bunch of folks on the line here, maybe even most of us, were involved in some way or other in the creation of new video materials and supplemental resources for Trent University for the execution of that agreement. And those have been available to them for over a year now. But we thought, in conjunction with the fact that we had received fairly good feedback about the idea of making such materials available to a broader audience, why not repurpose what we'd already put those labors toward? So we are basically duplicating what had been created as the Trent resource site, relabeling it, making a few adjustments here and there, removing some of the Broadview business kind of high-level material that we had provided for Trent students, but still retaining all of the publishing stuff. I hope that most folks on the line here have had a look at what we have produced for Trent, but in case not, I'll just do another quick screen share. My web browser at the Trent University site. There is already the duplicate version in existence, but there's a technical glitch with it right now, so I'm going to the Trent version instead. But essentially, one reaches a bare bones landing page. It's not a fancy site, it's not meant to be. And one can see a list of topics that are covered through video materials. So say you are interested in marketing. You click here and you get, mute this, you get Dylan's excellent presentation on marketing process as it exists at Broadview. This is, in this case, a 20-minute or so video covering these topics, and there are some downloadable materials that are covered within the video and that a student can then examine in further detail. NBIs, email campaign information, a promotional form, the kind that we request from our authors. We've been careful, of course, to ensure that only in-house materials or materials for which we have permission from the authors are provided among these downloadable resources. There are a lot of different videos here. Um, they vary quite a bit, to be perfectly honest, in length, in style. We didn't provide a lot of restrictions on how staff constructed these videos. They vary in whether they include any downloadable resources and what types of resources they have. So this is one of Dawn's videos. It includes review questions that ask for informational responses to some of the topics that Dawn covers in this video. Let's see, we got an images presentation that I made on the determination of quality and revision of images and a bunch of downloadable image files as examples. It varies quite a bit and is not meant to be a consistent, hyper-polished resource for anyone. It's treated more as a workshopping insider's perspective than a polished final result. Nonetheless, I think some people might find that approach interesting in itself. In total, there are 16 videos containing over 9 hours of content and a bunch of downloadable materials. The format of this site is such that it can be obtained in 2 ways. You can go to the Broadview website and purchase access in the same way that you would purchase access to the sci-fi website that Dawn discussed yesterday, or in the same way that you might purchase access to Jane Austen online, directly from the Broadview website with a credit card associated with your Broadview account. The problem with that, it's perfectly legitimate, and that might be the way that people want to access this. The problem with it is that it doesn't flow easily into the ecosystems of a lot of universities. So Eric and I constructed a slightly awkward, but we hope effective alternative path. And that is that you can buy an ebook through most of our vendors, VitalSource, Google Play, etc., Cortext. And the ebook will contain basic information on what is available on the website and the access information. So you open the ebook, you have the passcode and URL right there, you click that, and from there you have access to all of the web materials. We'll cycle out the passcode included in the ebook through updates intermittently to reduce the chance that it gets posted and repeated online, though there is some risk of that. Yeah, so it's kind of a fake ebook. It's a front for linking through to the website resources themselves, which are engaged through a browser. But that's our approach there, because then that allows it to be bought through VitalSource or Google Play, not through Kindle. And what is the market here? It's a bit of an experimental one. Will there be a market? Maybe not. But our investment in this project has been very low, since it's mostly just reuse of materials we'd already created. But I think most of us veteran reps have occasionally had conversations with instructors, especially in English studies programs, who have said things like, are there internship opportunities at Broadview? We usually say no. Maybe we can say no, but there is this. Or they've asked, I have a pro seminar. I have students who honors students who have a career focused 4th-year seminar that they attend. Do you have anything that I could use in that context? Sometimes those conversations come about, and here's something we can mention for them. And it's not going to be adoptions of 100 students at a time, but maybe 5, 10 people might want to use it in those contexts, and maybe it'll build some goodwill with the instructors who would themselves review and assign this material. Christine?
Just have some technical questions about the access that you mentioned. When you say we'll cycle out the passcode in the ebook, does that mean we're not offering a perpetual access version if that is then replaced across all copies of the book?
No, you can buy the access code through the Broadview website, and it'll be associated with your account in that place.
I mean through
context.
VitalSource. Sorry,
Yeah,
the VitalSource.
just to clarify the whole thing. So you can buy it through the website, and then you'll have it in perpetuity through your Broadview account. If you buy an access code to the ebook, so if you buy the ebook, I should say, through VitalSource, then the terms governing your usage of that ebook will determine the duration of your usage. So if you buy it's not technically in perpetuity. It's as long as VitalSource is around terms, then you will have access to the ebook. And when we cycle out the password, it will auto update in your copy of the ebook. So you will always have through your ebook an up-to-date password that grants you access to the site. It's just that you won't be able to just extract the password itself and keep it in perpetuity because it will change over time, but you will have access to the newest one.
And sorry, go ahead, Eric.
That's mostly correct. I just want to make one clarification, which is that we actually have to have one login style. We can't have them both running on the site. So what it won't be like the Jane Austen one. It will be URL and passcode, but we will cycle out the info document that you get access to through your account. So it'll update at the same time the ebooks update. So you will get the new passcode even if you've purchased it through the website or if you purchased it as an ebook.
Okay, thanks, Eric. That's helpful.
And a related question I had to that, I saw that on the version that you were showing us, Stephen, that they were private YouTube videos that needed an access code to enter. Are we also then updating all of the access codes to the YouTube video so that those can't just be linked and posted separately on the interwebs?
Intermittently, yes, they were updated last month.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, it's Vimeo videos we have passcode protected. So people they're unlisted, Eric. They certainly can't be accessed because one doesn't have the
unlisted,
code
yes.
by directly going to Vimeo.
Yes, they're only available through our distribution.
So it's always perpetual access, like when they're buying from whatever ebook platform. There's no
well, you can get an ebook rental, as you
We
can
can.
with all of our ebooks. So if you got an ebook rental, then you won't have access to your ebook after the duration of that rental, so you won't have the code. So it was governed by whatever terms you buy your ebook with, just as is the case with all of our ebooks.
Okay, cool.
Does that all make sense? Any questions about this one? I'd be very curious to hear any responses that people have to conversations and mentions of this on the road. It's going to be a niche book, but I think it will come up from time to time, and I have no idea whether people will find it useful or not. I know that some folks who helped in the construction or made the videos that have been provided for Trent, several folks, not picking on any one person, so I'm looking at you a little bit, Brett, said, I never want to watch that video because I'm, embarrassed by it, or, I can't stand the sound of my own voice. But I've watched all the videos. Emma's watched all the videos. They're pretty good videos, I gotta say, across the board. There's a lot of really good material there, a lot of really informative material, and I think well presented. It's a little unusual because the norms of videos these days are keep it micro, go for 10 minutes or less because attention spans wander. So a lot of them are longer than that, and so unconventional in that sense. But the presentation quality for a kind of workshopping style is, I think, pretty strong. You have any thoughts on that, Amar? Further comment? You had to proofread them all.
Yeah, I thought they were great. And I like how they're sort of casual in tone. It's more approachable than something super polished.
I have one more question, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
By what mechanism are we distributing examination copies of this? Is it going to be just that there is a link to the Broadview hosted version somewhere with an access code, or are we giving out VitalSource codes? Like, what is the best sort of protected way, I suppose, to enable this such that then professors don't go, great, here's the code, my entire class of students.
I think we'd have a
presented
demo
with that risk.
Yeah. We'd have a demo passcode, but yeah, there really isn't an amazing way to keep it protected in that sense.
Fair. Yeah, I just
Mhm.
thought I'd inquire that if the passcodes are only changed every X months, then it could be easily put up as part of an LMS in the meantime. But
Totally. And I think the same is true of the other companion websites we use to some extent. But disclaimers and faith in people's morality is what we'll have to rely on here rather than technical measures.
Circling back to the cynicism about ethics.
All right. That's all I got.
I'm wondering if people want to do a little break or want to power through. I didn't put a break in here initially, but we are running a little bit longer than I had anticipated. Thumbs up if you want a break.
I'm going to be able to move through mine pretty quickly, I think.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So we'll just keep going. Let's
Yeah,
go on to some technology. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think this one will take a ton of time to cover either. It's a B book and not in one of our big main areas, but I do hope it finds a bit of a market. Some of the blurbs that have come in for it are promising on that front. So I'll just start out by telling you a little bit about the book itself, give you a bit of an overview just so you have a sense of what it's like. This book is divided into several parts that each do some different work, but ultimately it is a history of technology book. That's going to be the primary market. That's who history professors are primarily who you're going to want to talk to about this book. That being said, it does incorporate a fair bit of philosophy, both in its sort of initial sections and weaving it in a bit throughout the book. So I'll talk a bit about how it does that. But the first major sort of section of the book is about defining technology. And this is kind of a philosophical project. And William Jones offers a novel 5-part definition of technology. I won't go into that. I don't think you need to worry about trying to tell a professor. Just telling them that there is a novel definition of technology provided will probably pique their interest, and then that might be grounds for providing a digital examination copy. But in addition to sort of defining technology on its own terms, this first major section of the book also distinguishes and discusses the relationship between technology and science. To our sort of modern understanding, we often think of these two things as inextricably related, and even often we're tempted to give science primacy in the relationship. That many people have the view, right, that, well, technology is just various applications of science. But that hasn't been true for pretty much the entire history of technology up until the late 19th and 20th century. And so the first section of the book is dedicated to kind of spelling that out for new students approaching the history of technology for the first time, while also providing this kind of philosophical background that gives us the tools to understand what technology is. After that introductory section, the book then moves on to a sort of chronological development of technology, the origins of technology. So, and how it sort of co-developed with early humanity itself. So there's a discussion of stone tool use, a chapter on the development of woodworking, the creation or implementation of agriculture and the extreme importance of that and the sedentary lifestyle that it allowed that led to further developments in technology. And then, of course, the development of writing, an incredibly important human technology really marks the endpoint of that sort of initial discussion of or tracing of human origins and technology. It ends with the development of writing and mathematics. After that, the book changes formats somewhat and discusses technology's relationship with major spheres of human existence. And these sections are in rough chronological order, but the author does make some jumping around. So one thing to remember, in case it comes up, is that although this is a history book, it's not a strictly chronologically ordered book. The section on sort of human origins, right? This is the second major section of the book, human origins and the development of technology. That proceeds in roughly a chronological fashion. Within this next section of the book that deals with technology's relationship to things like science, economics, politics, the environment, the chapters themselves are roughly in chronological order. So, for example, in the technology, science, and economics chapter, it proceeds from, say, the development of water power in ancient Roman aqueducts up to the development of the steam engine, right, with Watt and Newcomen. And so that traces kind of a rough chronological history and then goes on to discuss more in further developments in chemistry and mechanics after that. But the chapters themselves in this section, each kind of reset, will go back to an earlier point and then retrace. Here's technology and its historical development and impact on human society and politics, on the environment. Along the way, lots of case studies are presented, and there are many images throughout the book to kind of illustrate key episodes, technologies. I did some editing and developmental work on this, and one of the things I did was add the images to the book, which I think help provide some nice visually interesting things. And these range from depictions of and photographs of existing woodworking and stone tool historical artifacts to diagrams of how prototype steam engines worked. So there's a lot of interesting things in there. The diagrams tend to be annotated to some extent to tell you, sort of what you're looking at. So I think that really helps, again, students go from the examples and case studies as they're presented in the book and gives them something to sort of visually associate with that. The final section of the book discusses the transition to the digital age. And rather than trying to provide an exhaustive survey of every development that happened with circuitry, with computer technology, the development of the internet, Jones picked a kind of interesting case study to showcase how all of these different developments affected one specific area of human life, and that is music. So this chapter covers developments in radio, in telegraph technology, the development of the electrical guitar, synthesizers, circuitry, up to, music streaming platforms and internet distribution of music. So again, rather than trying to do, here's everything associated with the history of digital technology, it's going to provide it through the lens of music, which is kind of a quirky but I think interesting and fun approach that the folks who've read it so far have enjoyed. So that gives you a sense of sort of the whole book and what it does. I'll emphasize again that things that you might bring up when pitching this book are things like the blending of philosophy, right? So in the environmental section, there's lots of discussion of ethical issues regarding technology and climate. There's the philosophical development of the definition of technology that's intriguing. Technology's effects on society. So all of those things, I think, provide some additional interest in the book that goes a bit beyond a standard approach to covering the history of technology. And yeah, I think that the illustrations, and the book's also pleasant. It's conversationally written. It's not super technical in any way. Brett, do you have a question for now or at the end?
Just a quick one. That
Yeah.
postscript, does the postscript get into AI?
It does.
Yeah,
The
okay.
postscript does touch on AI. Good question. Yes. It's so I will say it's not a massive thing. It's really just a quick here are some things, especially in regards to climate and sort of AI. Those are the two big things touched on in the postscript, but it really is quite brief.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so market for the book again. I want to emphasize that this is, despite the fact that it does weave in a fair bit of philosophy, it really is a history of technology book, fit for history of technology and history of science courses. It might, and I mentioned this in the market section, it might be used in a philosophy of technology course by history-oriented philosophers. But it would be a stretch. I really think it would be quite a stretch. It doesn't touch on lots of classic ethics of technology issues, things like privacy, or it doesn't cover them in the sustained point counterpoint sort of way that's expected in most philosophy courses. It might touch on some of those issues, but not in a way that most philosophy courses or professors would find satisfactory. It could see some use potentially in a science and technology studies course that is focused on technology. But again, that's more of a stretch. Really, if you're pitching this book, it's probably going to be to someone teaching history of technology, maybe history of science, if they're also covering technology pretty extensively. Okay, Christine, question for now or?
Yeah, question for the end of your book talk.
Okay.
No rush.
Okay, very good. So I've provided some information about the competition here. The thing to know is that there are really advantages and disadvantages compared to each of these. The main thing I'll say is some of these books that do well in history of technology, history of science, have in some cases less coverage than this book, not covering more recent developments in digital technology, or even starting a little later and missing the sort of ancient origins of technology in the development of woodworking, stone tool use, those sorts of things. And almost all of these books don't have the philosophical angle, or it's not as strong as in this book. So history professors are probably either going to really like that or not. But you should mention that it does have this sort of angle, because that'll probably determine a lot about a professor's reaction to it. And then just to wrap up here, a couple of words on the related titles, areas of overlap. Technology and Society, a Philosophical Guide. If you're talking to someone teaching a philosophy of technology course, that's still probably going to be your best bet. If they seem dissatisfied with your pitch for that in any way, or you send them the exam copy and they say this just isn't what I'm looking for, then you might pivot. If you're in office, you could talk about this book, or if you've already sent an exam copy of Tech and Society, you might ask if they'd like to see this, but mention it's very deeply rooted in history. And so if they don't engage much with history in their course, they're not going to go for this. And then also with a brief history of Western technoscience, Kowalski's book does cover some of the same historical periods and events that Jones covers, but Kowalski's book is way less interested in providing kind of an overall introduction to the history of technology. So for history of tech, you would definitely pitch Jones over Kowalski. And Kowalski also focuses really in kind of a split way on science and technology, not giving preference to sort of one or the other in terms of coverage, whereas Jones' book is very firmly committed to surveying the history and some philosophy of technology. Okay, Christine.
Yeah. A couple times in your presentation, you mentioned sort of like the quirky nature of this section, or a little unusual how it changes from section to section in its approach. I'm curious, in your view, Archie, are those sorts of approaches to different sections, like is it a quirky book, or is it a pretty standard book that has some quirky elements to it, I guess, in terms of how it will fit into a class?
It is. So the writer does Jones does occasionally have some like interesting asides and whatnot, but primarily the organization of the book is somewhat unique in terms of how it approaches things. So plenty of the books on this competitor list do a kind of, hey, we're going to start at this point in the past and gradually work our way forward through standard periods, right? The medieval period, the Industrial Revolution, the advent of the digital age. This book takes a different sort of approach. The one I've mentioned, sort of covering, here's the co-development of technology itself. Here's how we see technology developing in very early humans. And now we're going to look at its impact in these various spheres of human life.
Do you see that sort of uncommon organization as a strength of the book that we should foreground while talking about it? Or is it more like professors might need to explore it on their own and see how it maps, I guess?
Yeah, it's definitely a thing that's worrisome. I did some work to help make it slightly more chronological than it was originally. It was originally even more sort of, here's some things here and here's some things in another section. I do think it's a worry, but given the reaction of the couple folks who've read it so far, I think this is going to be a history of technology book that either gels really nicely with a professor's approach to doing history, where they are perfectly happy to kind of jump around between historical periods for purpose of doing analysis, making different points about what technology is through a historical lens, or they're going to say, no, thank you. I want it. So I would say talk about it if you're talking about the book, because otherwise we could end up sending a comp that is going nowhere. Yeah.
Yep. Thanks.
Yeah. Yes, in the Guelph office.
I just had a question. To mitigate that problem, would it be worthwhile to have an alternate TOC that has like a chronological, like if you want to teach it in this way, even if it's just like on our website that it shows which pages you can flip to, if you are doing a chronological thing, or that'd be way too much work?
I think I'm not even sure it would work nicely in that way if it were to do that. I think it would provide for it's a good idea, like it's a good idea, but I think it would result in a very disjointed, like this happens even within particular sections of the book. So it's not like you could say, go to this section and you'll get this, right? Like there's a section of the book in the society that the society chapter that, transitions from gunpowder in ancient China to the forging of Japanese katana and the differential impact that gunpowder weapons had in medieval Japan versus medieval Europe. So yeah, I don't.
That's okay. That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
We can work with that.
Stephen.
Yeah, thanks. That was a very thorough and accurate presentation, Archie. I guess I might just add from my own experience when I was editor of this book before you came in and did a substantial and developmental edit. My impression of it is that this is kind of more comparable in its actual content and presentation to kind of pop history of science and technology books. Like think of Jared Diamond's books, think of Harari's *Sapiens*, that kind of book that maybe a little less argumentative than some of those very successful, best-selling popular science and technology books, but offering a really well-written and fascinating presentation that doesn't read very much like a textbook. So my impression had been that the kind of instructor who's going to adopt this kind of book is the kind of instructor who might look to some of those kinds of books in their teaching, probably assigning more than one of them to offer a few different perspectives on the history of technology, rather than someone who's looking for, this is my comprehensive history of technology textbook. Does that sound right to you, Archie?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that it is probably more or has lots in common with some of those sort of pop history books. I do think it's still definitely intended sort of as a textbook, and I would worry about pitching it as a supplement at at getting close to $40. Like maybe, but maybe not. But that's worth thinking about, I think, as another angle. Actually, here, I think a good way to think about this is if they are doing, because often this course may be offered, a history of science and technology, because sometimes, right, or if someone's teaching a history of science course, you might ask, are you also covering technology, like history of technology stuff in that? Very often the answer will be yes. And you might say, hey, here's a book that will give you a really nice introduction to some of those history of technology topics you may want to cover, along with a little philosophy that helps do some interesting conceptual work for your students to help distinguish it from science, and set it in appropriate context. So I do like that potential pitch as well of, oh, you're covering both sort of history of science and technology. Well, this would be a really nice companion in that context. But yeah, thanks, Stephen.
And it was credit to Archie that this book is coming out. You didn't say too much about the details here, Archie, but the project dropped off some 5 or 6 years ago as the author became quite elderly and was not able to continue the very final stages. The manuscript was nearly complete, but he was not in position to address the manuscript reviews or final revisions that were needed. And so it sat still for a while, and then his family, his sons, reached out and asked if something could be done here. And Archie did just a fantastic job of taking those final steps, adding some images, and bringing it to a state where it is ready for publication.
Well, thank you. Any other questions on history, or sorry, on technology, its nature and significance?
All righty. On to history. Sweet. I'll try to rip through these. We're kind of progressing through the afternoon. But these are two books that I think can be easily ripped through. Animals in 19th Century America. It's a Broadview Sources volume. And if you see a class on animal history in the United States, well, boy, do we have a book for you. This will be the one, the only one. It is, as a Broadview Sources volume, fits exactly into the format that we all know quite well now. Excuse me. Head notes, marginal glossing. It's introduced at the beginning. Chronology, discussion questions, and writing prompts throughout. It falls into that. We haven't had tremendous success in the Broadview Sources series, admittedly. And I don't know that this is the one that's gonna break the bank for us in the positive side of the ledger. But the positive here is that it's a really easily identifiable course. Anybody that's doing animal history, especially with an American focus, they're going to want to see this book. And there's going to be a very clear opportunity for this book to be used, adopted in that class. It's quite well done. There's 50 primary sources in the book and 43 images. Quite rich with a variety of different images, quite rich in source variety as well. There's a number of sources from quite heavy hitters in terms of American writers: Frederick Douglass, P.T. Barnum, not like writers within animal history, I mean, obviously, Upton Sinclair. But then there's also just a slew of other kinds of sources. Nance has done a really good job of putting those together: legislation, advertisements, cartoons, ads, photographs, postcards, correspondence, manuals, children's literature, just a ton of different things here that will provide students and instructors with a great number of contexts with which to teach animal history. Jumping to the contents, there are 4 parts, and in those 4 thematic parts, there are 17 topics. So that works out to about 2 to 4 sources, primary sources, for each of those 17 topics. I've restricted the table of contents on the NBI to just the topics, just to give our brains a break, because it's a 4-page full table of contents once you include the nitty-gritty of the actual sources. So I think this is probably a better way of handling it in-house. And as I say, this is not going to be a hard sell for anybody teaching animal history, and I don't think you're going to need to get into the nitty-gritty of those individual sources. You'll be able to show them the table of contents on your iPads, and they'll have a better sense of things right there. But yeah, each individual part of the 4 spans across the whole of the long 19th century. So from about 1787, I think, is the first source with Thomas Jefferson, and then the sources go up to 19 teens. They're not organized chronologically, they're organized thematically. That's in accordance with Nance's understanding of the course market, though. It's very rare for an animal history course just to kind of go by date. Here we go forward. They are much more commonly grouped according to topic. So the first part, colonization and the new zoopolitics. Zoopolitics just referring to the ways animals are understood and categorized and controlled. It contrasts indigenous perspectives on animals and human-animal relationships with those of European settlers coming across. So it gets into the transformation of wildlife into commodities and game as things hunted for play or pleasure. The role of livestock, connections between animalization and race and slavery. The next part, discovering extinction, looks at hunting, the destruction of wildlife through the 19th century, extinction, taxidermy, menageries and zoos. So things like the passenger pigeon and the decimation of the bison are in that part. Part 3, animals, cities, and industrialization, looks at place of animals in urban and industrial life, animals and consumers and contradictions in part 4. Kind of looks at non-human intelligence, vivisection, industrial meat production, even animal celebrity and pet keeping. Kind of shows that there's a growing affection and concern for some animals as the 19th century progresses, alongside increasing industrialized uses of other animals for things like food and research. Upton Sinclair's selections from the jungle in that section, as well as discussion of the teddy bear fad. This is not a book for straight up 19th century history classes. People will not use it in that. You'll want to bring it up with those people, but more as a means just to kind of pointing to animal historians in the department or environmental historians in the department. We have way different and more germane topics for 19th century American history. It's also not really a book for global animal history, unless the US features quite prominently in that class. This is a US historian class, a book for a US historian teaching a class in animal history. That's what this is. Importantly, though, it's not just like even though I talked about it not being chronological, this is not just a haphazard, random assortment of documents about animals. It is that. It's exactly that. But the collection really does have a clear thematic organization, even though the sources aren't presented strictly chronologically. There's a cohesive, cogent organizing principle to the sources. And Nance is a very, very well recognized scholar in this area. People teaching animal history will know her. And yeah, there's no other real comparable book out there about this, or that maps onto this either. Easy sell. Guelph office. You in the back.
I had a quick question. I think you were listing some of the things that are included in the 43 illustrations, but I didn't catch all of them. Would you mind giving those examples one more time?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's as long as you get a couple, Soha, you're going to be fine. But there's legislation, there's like journalism, newspaper pieces, there's political cartoons and other cartoons, advertisements, photographs, postcards from like zoos and things, correspondence. There's like manuals, how to euthanize like animals in a certain way, kind of a thing. There's some ugly. I mean, it's history of animals in America, 19th century. There's some icky things there. Children's literature as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, Christine.
Very important question. How many wonderfuls on the Brett Wonderful scale?
Well, in the context of animal history, it's a full 5. It's a full 5. You don't get better than this. I forgot the rating system entirely. I'll have to go back. I'll send an email around. But yeah, any other questions like this? Oh, sorry. Yeah, Emma.
Yeah, I only asked this because I once took a like animals in literature course. If we happen to see something like that, like a thematic course on animals not in history, do you think it's worth mentioning?
I think it would be a stretch.
Okay.
I think it would be a real stretch. Like this would basically be someone teaching that class just wanting to use the appendices from a couple of Bravio editions kinds of things. So it would be, it probably wouldn't be a perfect fit there. No.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, and Guelph again.
Yeah, just jumping off of Emma's question, actually, just wondering, there seems like there could be a lot of crossover with like an animal ethics course, or is that just totally way off the board?
I think there I wouldn't say you're way off the board there. Like it's a sensible question. But I just think the kinds of things that profs would touch on in an animal ethics class, you wouldn't be getting into like the nature of the historical relationship strictly in the United States. Yeah, but like in that kind of class, it would be much more philosophical in nature, I think. And there's not a lot of that here.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. I'll jump forward to another 19th century American history book, but this one obviously much more germane, much more on point for anyone teaching 19th century American history. I can begin with that, in fact, for the market. I think the market for this book is likely going to lean more into American history than into American literature, although it's a book you'd want to talk to people in both departments about. It's the new classroom edition of 12 Years a Slave. That's Solomon Northup's 1853 account of being kidnapped. He was kidnapped in 1941. Just as some context there, Frederick Douglass wrote his narrative, I think, in 1845. So Douglass's narrative in the United States came out at the very time that Northup was enslaved in Louisiana. And I think just that precedence, I think, is probably a big reason why Douglass is used more often in both classes. It's also, frankly, it's a more polished literary piece, but still, this is a very important narrative in American history. So Northup was a free Black man in New York and was kidnapped, sold into slavery, and then held in Louisiana for 12 years. And it's one of the reasons I think Northup's narrative works quite well in the classroom is you have this perspective of a man who was free for 30 years and then was enslaved and then kind of was rescued. So you have his perspective on the plantation system, the system of slavery, with both of those very key concepts in mind. It features the 7 original illustrations, as do the other competitors. So we're not unique in that regard, but we do have 10 other illustrations in the introduction and appendices, which other editions don't have. But yeah, the market, U.S. history, big time, history of slavery, African American history in particular. Those are the keys. It may fall into an American history class to 1865, a little less likely, but worth talking about. But it's not the key course there. In literature, you're going to want to look for courses on slave narratives and slavery and literature. Those two, possibly African American literature. Possibly 19th century, like American Lit topics courses. Very, very unlikely that this book would be used in an American literature survey, like that survey one. So don't go looking for it there. If someone's using a slave narrative in the American literature survey, it's going to be Douglass, like just plain and simple. The introduction does a great job of providing historical context, provides a lot of supporting material on the transatlantic and domestic slave trades, the economics and demographics of American slavery. There are historical tables and facts and figures. There's the famous diagram of the slave ship Brooks, which kind of showed how enslaved people were transported across the Atlantic. It's just insidious. There's a map of the roots of the domestic slave trade as well. Some good coverage of gender and the experiences specifically of enslaved women. Northup talks in particular in his memoir about 2 women that he meets, one in DC when he was being transported to Louisiana, and then another woman who was on the plantation in Louisiana. So it illustrates sort of central issues of family separation there, of, again, quite gruesomely, I won't get into this, but sexual violence in particular. But also importantly, the ways in which enslaved women asserted their agency and their humanity. That's kind of on the historical side for the historians. On the literary side, there's a good deal in the introduction on authorship. Northup worked with a white lawyer and writer whose name was David Wilson to produce the book. And the editors discuss the debate about Wilson's role and whose voice we're hearing when we're reading Northup's narrative. And they suggest that the text is best understood as containing multiple authorial voices. But they also identify the places where Northup's own perspective probably emerges most clearly. So that maps on to more literary studies-oriented discussions of the narrative. And then as well, there's the original literary and political context. So the reception of 12 Years a Slave as a published work. That's probably going to be more likely to fall into a literature class, because there's a great deal of focus on 12 Years a Slave having appeared just a year after Uncle Tom's Cabin. And Diller, in fact, is the editor of our edition of Uncle Tom's Cabin. The appendices I'll move through quickly here. Again, for historians, pro-slavery, anti-slavery views and voices, shows how the narrative entered the intellectual debates around slavery at the time. Fugitive slave laws, so relevant sections from the Constitution and the Fugitive Slave Acts are included there. A map of the Underground Railroad, runaway slave and fugitive hunting notices. And then there are, as I say, the contemporary notices and book reviews, and that covers reception history, allows students to see, like all of our BEs, honestly, how the narrative or how the text was received and discussed when it first appeared. I think it's important, though. I think this is important with all of our BEs, and I think I certainly get into this sometimes, this mistake I'll mention, because we want to sell the edition rather than just the text, right? Like, we have a broad view text. Instructors can get 12 Years a Slave in many forms. There's OER, there's it's public domain. They can get it on Amazon for $1. They can get it online in a ton of ways. So we want to sell the thing that we are giving them, not the text of 12 Years a Slave, right? So it's important to say, okay, here's this edition of 12 Years a Slave, and this is why you want this one. And again, the consideration here is the classroom apparatus, the historical and literary introduction, the annotation, the original illustrations, the appendices that let instructors and students contextualize the work within the debates on slavery from the period. But here as well, you can get into the specific competition, moving away from OER and public domain texts. The main two, there's a Louisiana State University Press edition, but it's quite old. It's the original scholarly edition. It's the one that put Northup on the map. But there's a Penguin and a Norton edition. The Penguin and the Norton edition have the advantage of slapping Henry Louis Gates Jr.'s name on that. Probably the biggest mover and shaker in the entire field. But I think as far as I can tell, he just edited the text. The introductions for both books are actually written by someone else. Gates only did the afterword in the Penguin. And it's a pretty relatively straightforward Penguin edition. We know what they do. The Norton is the more direct competitor, but it's 432 pages. It's $23. Ours is significantly fewer pages. I think it's 330, about 100 fewer pages, and it's $18. In the Norton, there's a 10-page introduction. We have a 20-page introduction that covers great deal more background. That's kind of rare for the Norton critical editions. Where the Norton critical edition really goes off base, I think, as far as the classroom texts, is there are 50 pages of primary sources, 100 pages of secondary sources, and 50 pages about the film, its reception and its adaptation, which is kind of weird for a history class in particular, kind of weird for a literature class, unless you're really focusing on adaptation. There's more than 200 pages of ancillary materials in the Norton. We have 20 pages of an introduction. We have 60 pages of primary sources. So it's comprehensive, but it's much more, I think, workable in the classroom. And that's what you're going to want to hit when you talk about this book with instructors. This will work better for your classroom, period. You might not want to put it so strenuously as that, but that's the way I'm talking to you about it. Stephen, yeah.
Thanks, Brett. On that matter of classroom utility, apart from the appendices, I guess I'm curious about the annotations, because these seem like Norton trade editions and Penguin trade editions. Are they thoroughly annotated in comparison to the Broadview? Do you know?
Oh boy, that's a good question and that I can't answer. They're annotated. I'm pretty sure the Penguin and the Norton both are annotated. I don't know how extensively they are. I would be wary of bringing that up as a point of as something that Broadview does better. Certainly as well. I wouldn't knock our annotation, but I think both of those are annotated. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Guelph.
I think Christine was first.
Oh, sorry. I didn't see. I just saw the two
Okay.
hands.
I just have a quick question.
Well, it's four wonderfuls. Sorry, I should have.
Okay, yeah, thanks. I'm keeping my wonderful tracker at the top of the NBIs, but just pricing confirmation. You mentioned the Norton as $23, but in here you have it as 18.
Oh, do you know what that would be? The list price. I think that probably is. Apologies. Yeah, so I'll make a note of that and resend the NBI.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that's almost
I was thinking,
certainly.
oh, they're all the same price, but if the Norton's
No.
$5 more, then that's a bit
That's
different.
yeah, I will send that back around. That thanks for noticing that. That is 100% list.
So down to 3 1.
No, that's more. That's 4.5.
No, I'm saying you.
Oh
You've
yes,
gone down a wonderful.
yes,
The
gotcha.
book has gone up a wonderful.
Perfect. Guelph.
I just had a question about our list, like more of a forward editorial. I feel like if you're talking to these profs, they might also bring up like Mary Prince, and we don't have a BE of Mary Prince. Is that in the works or anything like that that we should be aware of? Are we looking for something like that? Anybody know?
I thought, Stephen, I thought we had maybe Mary Prince under contract, but I don't know whether it's coming.
Pull up the sheet.
Yeah, I'm just
Can't
doing
remember.
that.
I believe it's being done by Carrie Sinanen at the
Yeah.
University of Winnipeg.
Yeah, I thought it was being done. So that
Yeah,
is
we have it
forthcoming.
scheduled for 2028,
Yeah,
2020. Okay.
Yeah.
tentatively.
thank you. Yeah, so that's coming out, and yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, but that's for sure. Like that's another one to bring up. I didn't put it in the related titles because that was forthcoming and I had forgotten. So thank you.
Thank you.
And there are, as you see from the related titles, there's a lot in here. Like we have a number of slave narratives and related texts there that could potentially fall into a class.
Sorry, I have one more question. Is this one at all, Brett, that you see appearing in those like core reading programs, or would that also be a Douglas kind of? Okay.
I mean, like if you have someone's complete attention in an in-person sales call, it might be something to say, oh, and by the way, this, but I have a really hard time imagining anybody picking, first of all, 2 slave narratives for that kind of a class. And I mean, like it's going to be Douglas. Like it's just going to be Douglas. Or Equiano for that matter, if you're going back a lot further. Yeah. Great.
Shall I look at some preview titles? And Brett, did you want to start with that?
Yeah, sure. I can start with that. I don't want to get into specifics here, but we do have a book coming that I would kind of equate, I guess, with Real College in terms of its potential for reaching a very large audience. One of the, I think, most populated introductory classes in the United States anyway is public speaking. And we will have a book. It's just at Copy Edit right now, or sorry, it's past Copy Edit. We're in the correction stage now. But well crafted, well said, public speaking from draft to delivery. I'm really happy with this book. It's done quite well. Its tone throughout is so very different from any of the other public speaking books that I've picked up and looked at closely. And I think it has the potential to do just a really wonderful bit of work for us. And I think it's really going to drum up a lot of attention. So it is a good bit away. It's not going to be, it's very unlikely, I'll say, very unlikely that this is going to be a book that we could pitch for January classes. There's the slimmest of chances. But let's just kind of, we'll bypass that for now. And just kind of, I really like you to think about your campus visits this term, your emailing this term, because this is a book that's going to be front and center come January. It's a good book. Very, very quickly, there's kind of two avenues into public speaking. The most common is through communication departments, and public speaking there looks at communicating a message to a group of people for a variety of reasons. Our textbook does that too, but it focuses, while doing that, much more on the delivery of the message. The two people that wrote the book are in theater studies, and that informs a lot of the content. Because, I mean, as we all know, like when you're paying attention to a speaker, the speech that resonates the most tends to be not the one whose content is organized perfectly and spoken, but the one that is delivered in the most dynamic way, as long as those other things are also in tow. But that book's coming out, and let's think a little bit about that. We're delving into different departments, I know, as we dance across our campuses. So it can't be a bad thing to knock on communications doors here and there, and at least mention that this will be coming out in January.
Right. Maybe I'll do mine. Yeah, just picking up on the same thread with cross-disciplinary books. It's kind of in the same boat. We'll have quite a few coming out in the space of December to April. And because we don't always see people in other disciplines often, it's probably good to jot down notes if not write down backorder comps for something like Well Crafted, Well Said. And on my end, in politics departments especially, we have the book on the politics of climate change coming out at some point next spring. Very topical, very easily identified. So if you are having conversations with anyone on that topic, especially in Canada, it's written by Canadian authors and it has a little bit of a Canadian slant, but it does endeavor to be appropriate for American audiences too. Please do note that that's forthcoming and potentially offer a back-ordered comp. But also in politics, sort of, we have the PPE Plus book. So again, that is for philosophy, politics, and economics programs, which are generally cross-disciplinary and sometimes are hived off as their own actual space with a separate department, but usually are just faculty from each of those departments getting together to teach components of the course or the curriculum. So if you are having conversations with anyone who's doing PPE, and a growing number of North American institutions are adopting such programs, please do mention that we have a book forthcoming in the spring, and happy to provide a copy of that when it comes. And that is a generalized introduction to the topic of PPE, suitable for an intro course on that theme. In my experience, those programs are often like 1 or 2 courses on PPE itself, and then you fill out your degree by doing a bunch of optional courses from across those disciplines. So this is for that PPE course. And lastly, across disciplines, we have feminist perspectives on contemporary issues. This is a philosophical book written by a philosopher, but in a cross-listed program. And I actually suspect that its primary audience may be in introductory gender studies courses. This is a book that will um, engage with a number of contemporary issues, a lot of kind of cultural stuff. It's a short text, but it links to a lot of podcasts and online readings and tries to engage with contemporary cultural discussions. I realize the title is a little bit similar to that of a much older book in Broadview's list. Um, they are quite different books. I'll talk about that more in January, but they are both there in the catalog. If you are having these conversations, there's very minimal market, especially at this point, and there never was for that older title. Um, so please do be aware of the forthcoming book that is worth pitching and mentioning and jotting down names to follow up with on introductory feminism, introductory gender issues courses, all forthcoming in the spring.
Okay, and I'll try to zip through mine quickly. I may have up to 8 books coming out in the spring. Thankfully, 3 of them are the same thing, which are the new editions of Critical Thinking, the 8th edition. Long delayed and long awaited. It is probably worth sort of mentioning that this is coming if you're talking to people who teach critical thinking, especially if they use the 7th edition. It's been quite significantly updated by Jonathan Lavery in the last few years, and features an entirely new chapter on judgments, intuitions, and biases, and also has done a lot of revision in the critiquing the media, critically thinking about media, and having arguments with other people, the dynamics of discussion and disagreement. So I think some really exciting and good changes to the new edition there. Other things coming, our edition of the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius by Bob Martin. Big thing to remember there, the cool feature is that it's got really well done interspersed commentary running throughout the Meditations, and there's a cool index of topics allowing you to kind of quickly find, if you want to say, survey all of Marcus Aurelius's thoughts on death, it'll tell you, read this section, and this section. You can just go find them. So that's a really neat feature that I think is unique to our edition. I don't think there is another index of topics in any other editions done that way. We've also got Naturalism and Philosophy by Richard Richards coming. Naturalism's the view that science and empirical facts are necessary to consider when doing philosophy. Could be used in some, because it covers such a wide range of philosophical topics through the lens of naturalism. If you got a really dedicated naturalist who's teaching an intro course, it could work for that. But more likely found in methods courses or the occasional course that's offered in philosophical naturalism itself. We've got a new logic text coming, It Follows by Kent Peacock. Just one of the great things about this is it's got helpful student and instructor manuals and tons of solved exercises. It's a thing logic profs always want, and there are some reserved for testing purposes on the part of the instructor, but a bunch of exercises in the book and on an additional student manual with solutions so that students can check their own work. We also have Principles of Reasoning by Paul Rusnick coming out. This is going to be a new critical thinking text with a much stronger focus on deductive reasoning and formal logic than is typical of a critical thinking text. So provides something a little different from from our other critical thinking offerings, and it has a pretty substantial pre-existing market at the University of Ottawa. In fact, that's where we suspect it will mostly be adopted, but maybe it'll find some other homes elsewhere. And then finally, the iffiest thing on the list is an interactive guide to logic and critical thinking by Katerina Sarodaki. This is planned as a digital-only text, and it teaches logic and critical thinking through interactive exercises. That is, in this sort of ebook format, it has interactive questions that are necessary. They're not exercises to be done at the end, but rather you learn critical thinking and logic through doing the exercises. And when you answer the question, it gives you more information, whether you got it right or wrong. It'll tell you what you right, the reasons, the explanations for why the answer is what it is. So interesting approach to doing that. And those are my books. Oh, yes, Dave, thank you.
Just the Hughes and Lavery, is there a plan to do, is the American one going to be done at the same time, and is the concise one going to be done at the same time?
Yes, sorry. That's what I wasn't clear on when I said it. One of my books is, or three of my books are the same book. Yes, we are getting Canadian and concise editions. The American version or standard version will be coming out first, but shortly to follow up with Canadian and concise editions. Those are all going to be sort of, released in short order. Other questions? Anything else?
Lots of good stuff.
Yeah.
All right.
Any last notes from anybody or? Nope. Okay, cool. This will be, it's recorded, so it'll be up on the YouTube playlist in a little bit once I've done all the timestamping. So you can go back and reference stuff, and we'll recirculate any of the end guides that we needed, other stuff, and also the PowerPoints that the editors put together. I'm going to recirculate those too, so everybody has them all at once. So yeah, we'll see that early next week probably. Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone. Bye.